See, it's not really activism. In fact, it's almost like anti-activism, but not quite. It's just like, because I feel like sometimes activism can be an overcorrection, and like people just sort of flip-flop from one extreme to the other, and whatever the norm currently is, someone is bound to push against it if it becomes like too much of a norm. Like if anything is pushed too much because it's seen as like this new ideal, it can very easily just kind of end up being a similar oppressive feeling that whatever the correction was correcting. So in regards to stuff like cancel culture and call-out culture, which is like, I feel like more tied to abuse politics. Cancel culture is sort of anything from like abuse to just like saying the wrong thing or being uneducated or being offensive. And then there's call-out culture that is sort of what comes before the abuse politics. But they're kind of sort of tied together to me. Like the mentality behind them, I feel, is the same. It's this like cleansing of bad, like this, we're scouring every nook and cranny of like every person and every person's personality and character and their relationships, and we're constantly doing like running diagnostics on people, and like filtering it through the lens of like what the right way to be is and seeing if they line up. And it started because we were trying to bring all of these things to light. Like we were trying to talk more about abuse and the sort of nuances of abuse, like anything from emotional abuse, mental abuse, to like, you know, violent, perpetual violent, like physical abuse. It was a conversation about like, oh, there's all these different kinds of abuse, and like mental abuse and emotional abuse can be just as harmful and like that's still abuse, and kind of getting people to recognize that there's harmful dynamics all around and like we should be better to each other, basically. And like let's look at ourselves and like break these generational curses that like our parents have passed down to us, and like let's look more closely at our own relationships and like let's bring all this stuff to light and talk about it. And I think it was really empowering, and I mean rightfully so, really empowering for people to talk about these things that they might have been struggling with like only internally because like it wasn't being recognized in communities yet, seemingly. So yeah, but then it becomes like a dogma in itself. I think that's the right word. We have to jump through all these hoops to make sure we don't do all of these bad things that we now realize are bad. So make sure you are communicating like this and you're doing things like this and you're never doing this and you're never doing that and you're never doing, like, I feel like the list of like things to never do is like way longer and more focused on than the list of things to do. And that's just like basic law of attraction stuff. So like obviously what's happening, basically I just feel like it is sort of like a double-edged sword. How like if you just push too hard against something, you end up attracting it more, or like you just become hyper fixated on like looking for like evidence of abuse or like harm like constantly, and you're on the lookout for all these bad things, then you're probably going to find them a lot. And also it's just like, I think it's in most situations like good to have sort of an attitude of forgiveness, because like it implies that like you don't have your own like shortcomings and like issues that someone else, like you could be the bad guy in someone else's narrative, and like everyone kind of is, like it's just sort of unavoidable. And I think sort of the downside of like becoming so fixated on like less severe forms of abuse, I mean, even though they're all like traumatizing, and none of this is to say that like abuse is not traumatizing at all. It's just like you just have to be really wary of these like absolute like standards and rules, because I mean, you would hope that someone would forgive you at your low moment, and it's just sort of like it's kind of up to the individual. I think like you should just sort of protect your people that you keep close, and I think there's kind of a danger to making these politics like so global, because it's like it becomes really divisive really quickly, because like people can't live up to all of these standards all the time, and there's many reasons for that and circumstances, and because stuff's just complicated, so it makes people feel like they have to choose, because they start to see like these lines that get drawn, but there's always people that are sort of questioning it, and there's always people that like still support each other, even if they maybe don't like talk about it outwardly. I think that there's like almost like a weird performative aspect to it, especially online. Like virtue signaling, I think that's a term that would be relevant here, where you're constantly like trying to prove to people that by, you know, denouncing strangers on the internet or celebrities or whatever, or like getting involved in other people's drama that you don't know, and making assumptions and like spreading all, you know, like it's like you're publicly denouncing like all this stuff that people have decided is like bad now. And there's such a wide range of it too, and like I've seen people, like two people call like what the other person was doing like abuse, basically, and I feel like that just sort of sums it up, that like there's just no absolute for this kind of thing. There's no like foolproof thing. You can't like put people through like a scan and be like, oh, okay, like you just, it's impossible to analyze all those power dynamics and like people's trauma and like and I think that ties into cancel culture too, because obviously it's just this culture of like no forgiveness and like no unconditional love, and like if people are being defined by like their worst moments or their worst opinion or their worst like thing that they said, and they're irredeemable. But it's like I mean, I just feel like you would have like no friends left if you did that with everyone, actually. So it just seems like kind of unrealistic. So I also think of cancel culture as like our super ego, and like all of our like bad selves as like the id, and but like the point is to sort of integrate, like I just you're kind of you need to like, people need to integrate the light and the dark sides, so to speak, because it's just gonna be simpler in the end. you'll be able to like accept more and like move on from things and like tolerate things more. I think that this mentality can actually keep people like in a perpetual state of trauma brain and like survival brain. And that doesn't, like, it's not helpful. So, and like, I can speak to this firsthand as well, that it's really easy to get stuck in this kind of like vindicated state. But the tables always turn, and they're bound to turn on you at some point, because people are going to find out that you're not a saint, and then it's just all going to be pointless. So this is not really something that can be, I could rightfully call like activism, because it's more individual, and it's like whatever way you can gain this sort of mindset, whether that's through like I mean, most religions really, in spirituality in general, and I think that that's like what a lot of this needs. It might sound like so, but it's true, because it's really about like the individual and like doing things well in your life, and like that creates sort of a ripple effect. It's not like this like organizing thing like where there's rules, and it's just like it's important for each individual person to be on this like, I think shadow work is just extremely important. And like if a lot of people really did that, and that in itself, like maybe that in itself would be activism, because it would create this like ripple effect that doesn't come from these like more structured movements with like names. And I mean, I guess you could name this one, but there's no like rule book, but it often feels like there's a rule book, if that makes sense. Maybe what I am talking about is like starting a religion. I don't know. I'm telling people to convert to something that helps you cultivate forgiveness and an integration of your shadow and like saintly self, so that you're better equipped to deal with like the chaos of life, and understand that you're a work in progress and so is everyone else, and that relationships will actually be better if you have this mindset. And also, none of this again means that you should like tolerate perpetual mistreatment if you don't feel like it's worth it. You know, of course you're more than welcome to make your own decisions. Like, not every relationship works out. It's just I think that it's important to hold both in mind. It's just, this whole sort of thing is about balance, and it's like an anti-extremes sort of ethos. There's a lot more here that I feel like I could really talk about, and like as I was writing this, I just kept feeling like I needed to do more and more research to sort of make it like more provable, but right now I think that just offering up this sort of ethos to get people thinking about what that could like mean for themselves, and maybe it is a cult that heals your inner child, you know. That is kind of like what the ideal religion is, right? Unfortunately, I just don't have all the answers. So